Thank you for inviting me, first of all. As you know, I work in Radio Kerry. Two things were very apparent from the early days of Radio Kerry, which was almost 30 years ago now. The first was that Kerry people love to talk about everything: news, sport, politics, music, the weather. So if local radio was going to work anywhere, it was going to work in Kerry. The second thing that was very apparent from the early days of Radio Kerry was that Kerry people are widely connected and never lose their sense of place or their connection to the kingdom, whether it's through the rows of Tralee centres, business people or extended family members. There's no event that happens in any part of the world that it's not possible to find a Kerry person to talk about it. So Radio Kerry would like to think that we're the modern day descendants of the communications revolution started here in Valentia, and that's a big responsibility. So anything we can do to make sure that this story is told widely and to support the campaign for UNESCO World Heritage status, we will do. So we're going to just go back to our panel for some questions first of all, and I'm going to ask some questions on behalf of the committee, and then they're happy to take questions from the audience after that. So Danielle, in terms of the UNESCO heritage sites, Ireland actually ranks quite low. We've only 2 in Brunabona and in the Skelligs. So the opening of the tentative list is a very big deal. At this event last year, the Director General of UNESCO, Irina Borkova, said that the project here was an extraordinary, fantastic story, and one which should be shared with the whole world. So can you maybe explain to the audience what that status would mean for Valentia and the cable station?
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, we have opened the application process. The tentative list is open now. This is something that we're obliged to do under the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. It's something that we want to do. We want to identify sites that are of outstanding universal value. Yes, we have very few, but the bar is very high to demonstrate that a site is worthy of protection, theoretically, by the international community. In terms of what it might mean for Valentia, it's certainly a very prestigious signifier. It would have the world's eyes on Valentia in that regard. You can probably expect more visitors, more tourists. It will also mean challenges for the community. It will mean capacity building in terms of understanding World Heritage and working together to ensure that outstanding universal value is protected to long term. And it will also mean a great deal of responsibility on the part of the state, in particular the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht and the local authority to ensure the long-term preservation of the cable station and the associated sites. So it's a great opportunity, it's a great project, and it also has a great deal of challenges too.
A lot of responsibility. Minister, as we've heard today, and as most people in the room already know, Valentia was for many years at the leading edge of technology and visionary for its time. In today's world of communication technologies, they're shaping everything we do: business, society, personal lives, and with the emergence of related technologies such as artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things and 5G, what would you advise the community of Valentia to do to make sure that they stay at that leading edge?
So as I tried to describe there in my speech, I think the global economy within which Ireland is participating, the rate of change within it is accelerating, and I think that's going to continue to happen. And I believe the area of change in the area of our lives in which that will be most evident will be the impact of the digital economy and the kinds of work that we have and the new work that will be created. There is a pessimistic prophecy in relation to that, which is that much of the work that we are involved in could either fundamentally change or go. The other hugely positive side of that coin is that the cost of producing products and services is likely to radically decline as well. And the marginal cost of producing the next thing could get lower and lower and lower. And the economic opportunities of that are just gigantic. So how do we benefit from it? And how do the people of Valentia, of Kerry and our country benefit from it? It's number one, continue to look at what we are doing, in particular in our primary schools, to make sure that our young boys and girls are leaving our primary schools with the mindset and attitude that is needed for this new world. And I think we do better at that than we sometimes give ourselves credit. Number two, I think the National Broadband Plan and how we look at digital connectivity is of such importance. The world of work in a number of decades' time will be completely different to the world of work of today. And we have to be ready for that. And I believe the two of those things coming together, combined with the qualities that we as a country already have, and that the communities of Kerry show every day, offer us the best chance of responding back to this level of change.
For a long time, Kerry has looked for a big manufacturer to come in, the big factory that's going to employ 500 people. But you hinted in your own speech that maybe the way forward will be a network of digital hubs between Sneem, Dingle, Valentia, Carrasabine, that will be the way forward for areas like Kerry.
So it's already happening. It's happening in front of us now. So you always get into a bit of difficulty when you're in a room like this if you invite interactivity, particularly if the host hasn't done it. But might anybody hazard a guess as to where one of our leading centres for advanced manufacturing is? Kerry? Okay. West Cork? Leitrim, yeah. See how many of them there already are? The most extraordinary one I've seen is in Mullingar, outside the town of Mullingar. And what is now happening is, for much of my life, we associate with manufacturing with scale. You needed the big factory. You needed the big country. That, due to technology, is now changing. Where manufacturing will become more based on what the individual customer wants, and technology will allow the production of that product in smaller scale. So I believe there's every prospect now that we will see the acceleration of manufacturing moving back from countries in which there has been located. And I think there's every prospect that custom-made products will be built in small quantities, and I want it to be in small countries and in local communities. But you can't do that unless you can access that world with the best connectivity possible. And that's what the debate about broadband is all about. Mm-hmm. So I saw a machine in Mullingar that is about how you can adopt and change runners. And we'll get to a point that if Pascal wants to order a particular runner in a particular colour, in a particular size, that runner will be built to my specification, and it probably won't be built in a very big factory. That world is coming at us. Why shouldn't Carrasabine be part of it?
Kevin, I think Cyrus Field would have loved you on his team. You've been a great agent for him in telling his story, and he definitely was somebody that had drive and vision. But Ireland has benefited hugely with over 760 US companies in Ireland employing over 160,000 people. And the relationship has worked both ways with 100,000 Irish people employed in the US as well. How do you think this ecosystem will evolve as Asia evolves and Brexit looms and technology is becoming such a big issue? How can a small country like Ireland continue to prosper?
So as it relates to the United States, Ireland is not a little country. You have 30 million relatives hanging around in the United States, so we don't think of you as a little country. We sort of think of you as next door. Clearly, the business relationship between Ireland and the United States is a thing of wonder. What started out as relatives like my grandparents sending a few dollars back to Ireland at Christmas time has really developed into this huge economic bridge between the United States and Ireland, in which every year more people can cross and more people can prosper in more and more, as the minister was saying, in many, many different ways. I think that in trying to lure Irish businesses to the United States, I tell Irish entrepreneurs, think outside New York, Boston, and the Silicon Valley. There are several thousand miles in between there that are much cheaper, much easier to work through, and it gives the entrepreneur a chance to fail more than once. Taking up the example of Cyrus Fields, who didn't quite make it the first couple of times, if if the Irish entrepreneur goes to New York, because of the high cost of living and the high cost of everything else, you get maybe one chance at making it, where you, in a place like St. Louis or Kansas City, you can fail several times and still be within budget. And I think I would say the same thing for American businesses coming here.
How do we convince US companies that Kerry and Valentia are the place to be?
Yeah, and everybody, all of the Irish it's obviously people want to catch the big fish. You know, you want the next multi-billion-dollar company to come in and move into your well, not your neighborhood, but close to your neighborhood. You know, and so everybody is fishing in that water. Everybody is looking for the next big thing to come in. When in fact, I would think a place like, you know, if you walk around Valentia Island today, I mean, this is absolutely gorgeous. If there is sufficient broadband or connectivity, as the minister said, to attract people here rather than the high stakes of Dublin, you know, why wouldn't you want to come here as long as you can be connected? The next big thing is probably going to be a whole bunch of little things, and a place like Valentia Island or County Kerry or County Mayo are tremendously attractive to Americans, and you, because of the warm nature of your reception, and because we all feel so at home here, I mean, this is an ideal place.
Okay. Sean, the world's population is growing rapidly from being a mere 4 billion in 1975 to 8 billion by 2019. It's projected that it could grow up to 13 billion, with over 80% of those living in cities. How do you see the business world evolving in such global growth, and what role do you see technology playing in this regard? Who will be the winners and who will be the losers?
Well, I think Ireland sometimes is viewed as a kind of a sociological petri dish by people even like the Chinese. We're one of the few nations on earth that transitioned from an agrarian society through to the service economy without going through a process of industrialization. And when I'm in China, that is a thing that fascinates the Chinese from a policy perspective, because it answers this question that you talked about, the Sheriff Street problem and the North Inner City Trust, which was who were one of the great objectors actually to the IFSC back in the mid-1980s, because they felt that this was going to be, frankly, an imposition of yuppies basically on a vibrant inner city community. And there was a study done actually which slightly contradicts, Pascal, what you said. The most successful social mobility that has occurred almost anywhere has been the social mobility of the Irish agrarian working people, is that they moved in the course of the last 2 generations from the land into the services and the administrative heart of the cities. And that's something that's fascinating to the Chinese, who have these extraordinary cities, who have universities that churn out graduates at extraordinary scale. I have a business in Krakow in Poland. The Jagiellonian University and several of the other technical universities in Krakow produce 30,000 graduates per annum. Highly skilled, incredibly capable, multilingual individuals. And I kind of point out to my own kids who are in the university process at the moment that they are now competing because of technology with individuals and graduates of that nature. So the skills question is the most important one. And the minister mentioned tax and data. I think the French have just made an effort this week to begin to, I say actually, can you establish jurisdiction over data? If you can establish jurisdiction over data, you can then tax it, and you can begin to understand how you extract value. And some of the problems that we've had in the country have been because we've attracted companies who, through their management of data, have created supranormal profits that are beyond anything that any manufacturer ever produced really in the past. And the way you attack that is through skills. And that's why I think fundamentally, I still think there should be a statue erected on O'Connell Street to Donogh O'Malley, who brought universal education to Ireland in 1966, who pushed the idea that participation in second and third level education becomes incredibly vital. And to your question about what brings industry here, skills. Simple as that. Technological skills, engineering skills, people who are able to actually live off the excess capacity of those economies. You know, I would say what I described earlier on is the existence of Dublin being able to exist off the excess capacity of the city of London and US asset management in this very narrow slice, desire to access the European marketplace. They had an easy access to the right jurisdictional and skills base. That is what's going to drive your ability to attract modern industries here. The effective participation at third level, at secondary level, and I think actually at primary and
Having those
kindergarten.
skills is probably important too in retaining young people here, that they don't feel they have to go to Dublin to either get the education or the skills.
The sad fact of it is that there is going to have to be a degree of iterative migration. You cannot learn those skills in small packets. You're going to have to go, learn them, and return with them. That actually is the lesson that it's very difficult to grow those from a policy perspective from the ground up. You have to, and that's what solves the issue about participation in the inner city, is that participation rates at third level that provide the skills that allowed you to participate in these businesses are the entry point. And that's the thing that I think that policy really needs to orient itself towards if we need to maintain our competitiveness.
Yeah. There's great work being done at the moment by Kerry SciTech with the Kerry technology companies working together to show people that they have careers here, they can move here and have a future here, even if it involves moving between those companies. Do you think that's the way to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes you've got to go far away to come back home. And in an environment where I spend not a huge amount of time, but 2 or 3 weeks in China every year, and when you begin to see the rapid change of technological change there, went to visit an asset manager, Chan Hung, and they're the asset manager for a thing called the Alipay Fund, which is the single largest collective vehicle on earth. It has 100 million subscribers, and you can buy it on your iPhone or on your Samsung. With that, there's no regulatory barrier to it. And when you begin to look at the technology that allows you to be able to do that, you begin to see that actually those skills, you really have to go and learn what is happening in other economies and begin to be exposed to it and begin to influence what your kind of vocational and other training sits around.
Okay. We'll take some questions from the audience. If anybody, you might just identify who you are and who your question is for. Anybody has any? Down the back, Sean.
Sean de Butler, the question is directed at both Sean and indeed the Minister as well. Sean, you identified in your presentation that the initial banks were backed up by substantial traders, effectively, that had assets. You also identified the fact that as the crash was caused, in a sense, through valuations of assets that effectively didn't exist. And subsequently then, coming on from that, there was substantial legislation, global legislation put in place to protect the markets going forward. The Minister mentioned in his presentation that, the future is built on solid foundations of policy, etc. Do ye feel that we should fear the establishment of this currency by the likes of Facebook now in light, and facilitated ironically enough by globalization, to enable them to develop this currency going forward, when effectively I would suggest the assets of Facebook could be wiped out by a scandal at any stage?
Well, my industry has been rumoured to be about to be obliterated since I've been in it for the last 30 years by technology. And I think that cryptocurrencies in aggregate and all of the ICOs that came about are very interesting. And I've spent actually a lot of time with some of the major participants in the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency worlds to see actually are there mechanisms in which you can insert them into a financial chain of intermediation. But all of the things that are placed as obligations on financial institutions now, know your customer, know the origin of the cross-border flow, know how to understand how to protect that asset in the long run, have very clear rules and obligations as it relates to the restitution of assets that may have been taken. None of those rules can currently apply in crypto. Now, I actually think that what Zuckerberg is trying to do is very interesting, but he is trying to evade supranational regulation. And if I had to choose who to be ruled by, a Facebook mob or a government elected, I don't think is a kind of a difficult choice. So I think that, not that I would ever kind of get political here, but Trump tweeted something I actually agreed with, is that if Facebook wants to be a bank, they have to get a banking license and participate in global banking regulation like everybody else. Otherwise, the barriers to entry are all kind of out of scope. So I'm not saying a skeptic on cryptocurrency, because it's definitively present, but I don't see us conducting global trade, international cross-border capabilities in ICOs, in crypto, or in what's it called, Faber, or you might Libra. Sorry, thank you. A little senior moments there.
So I think it's an enormously significant development. The potential for this to happen. And last week I was in our monthly meeting of European finance ministers, and I raised this as an issue because I think it's deeply significant. It's deeply significant for two reasons. The first one is the question of scale. The current market capitalisation of Facebook is more than €500 billion per year. That makes them, from a market capitalisation point of view, bigger than any bank in the world who is valued in the same way. The second issue of scale is their current user base. If a small number of their current users were to adopt Libra, it would be a globally systemic currency. So that is the level of change involved in the announcement that they have made. And then if you look at it purely from a monetary point of view, which, as you'll all know, is policies about money, this is the first time that a currency has looked to be developed to act as a means of payment for a broad number of people that is not backed by a state. And if it's not backed by a state, it's not backed by a lender of last resort. So I agree entirely with Sean in terms of how we concluded, and much of it is analysis as well. It's now really important that governments and the central banking community begin thinking about the regulatory response to this. Because many would have thought that the business model that Facebook first developed 10, 15 years ago would never acquire the scale it has now. And therefore we need to think about how, if this idea develops scale, what do we do and how do we manage it? And I believe the first port of call is the supranational institutions, the European Union, the OECD, our leading central banks like the Federal Reserve and the ECB, to begin to think about how this would be regulated if and when it happens. And I think it's deeply important that we do that.
Okay, anyone else? Yes.
Hi, it's Nicola Cook here from National Broadband Ireland, who are hoping to deliver the National Broadband Plan across the country. I drove from Dublin today, 5.5 hours to get here. And just to hear, thank you, Leonard invited me. But just in terms of what the Minister was saying in relation to cottage industries and, you know, the way things are going to be, I suppose, produced nearer to their source and that, I just think, I suppose, climate change and climate action plan is really going to drive that, isn't it? And I suppose, how do you perceive now broadband and the digital economy and all that feeding into sustainable living and sustainable communities? Because that's really the most important thing, because we have no future without maintaining, I suppose, what we have here right now.
Nicola, I think it is indispensable to how communities outside of our larger cities respond back to the challenge of how we decarbonise our economy. And I remember in Budget 2019, I made the decision not to increase carbon taxation. And with incredible timing, the following day, the International Panel on Climate Change came out and said that we all have to increase carbon taxation. And then a week or two later, the yellow jacket phenomenon developed in Paris. And it shows that if globalization has the ability to generate winner beneficiaries and those who lose from it, so does how we respond back to climate change. It is as capable of doing that. And that is why I believe, as you've identified, digital connectivity outside of our cities will be crucial for how we do it, in terms of changing where citizens work and the kind of work that they can do. And this decision and the plan that you will be rolling out is not about the Ireland of 2020 or 2021. It's about the Ireland of decades into the future and how we are ready for that. So that's why I think it is so important in the context of climate change as well.
Okay. Yes.
Globalisation again. Tiago, don't know
Sorry,
how's
you
the
might.
name.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm local. Well, I'm exiled in Dublin actually, but I am a real native of the island.
You have our sympathies.
Pardon? We have a great tourist product here with Star Wars, the Skelligs. Now, hopefully, we'll have the cable. And the third leg of that, I think, is the Valentia ferry. So I don't want an answer. You might have a look at it. You might have a look at it for me. And as we're here on transport, I have the CEO of the county here, and I would ask her to look at the ring of Kerry Road because I travelled it the other day, and my tires are in muck. These are the things I think. Services. We talked earlier about factories and that. I think for an area like this, it will be services, it will be connectivity. It won't be something dependent on making something to transport it to Dublin or for. See, if you take the Mullingar example, they're within 1 hour of the port in Dublin for transport. Somebody said here 5.5 hours has it just been coming here today? So it will be services, and I would ask people to look at how we can develop services in the Barony of Ivra. Thank you.
Okay. Stand here, Maris.
Thank you. My name is Valerie Beattie. I'm just an ordinary person in the street. But if I could just ask the panel really about the challenge of communication. We're talking about communications here, globalization, and it's clear that if you write an article of more than 3 or 4 paragraphs, maybe the first paragraph or the first few lines are read and maybe the last line is read. So how do you actually communicate so that you bring these people who feel that they are not part of the system actually in and inform them of what is going on?
I'll go first because I'm pleased to say on this. Yeah, it's true. We don't read in the same way that we used to. We read across the top, and then down the outside, and then we take in, as you said, the last sentence. So, I suppose society is ripe for disengagement and feeling outside of the community. Isolation is one of the biggest problems that we're facing socially. If we could bring it back to the cable station, to the project that we've discussed here today as an example of communication, people need to feel as if they associate with their heritage, with the custodians of their heritage. So that's a challenge for people in positions of responsibility, people in governmental positions. But one way that it can be overcome is by having physical loci. So a building like this, for instance, is something that people can focus on, associate with, understand, and that can bring them together in the same way that we are brought together today. And it's not easy anymore. You can't just look at your phone, you can't just look at a tweet and feel that you understand a World Heritage Project, that you understand Skellig Michael. You have to make an effort, you have to learn how to read again, which I had to do a few years ago, and you have to come to events like people are today, but it is great that so many people came today, and I saw you all crowded at the door. People came late, but it was great to see that push in. That's all I was saying.
So I think that we've mastered the art of getting words from one place to another. We've got that down. We can get them, to outer space. What we haven't figured out is how to make it true. The biggest problem we have these days, I believe, is that are things based on making sure things are based on fact, and we haven't figured that out yet. We used to rely upon reputable newspapers, or then reputable radio stations, and then reputable television stations, and now we have a whole bunch. Everybody's a publisher. And you can publish almost anything, say almost anything, and not have to stand by and verify it. And that's the trick for the next 10 or 12 or 15 years. We have to figure out how we have a conversation based upon what really is reality as opposed to somebody just making something up. And we've accomplished the technical parts. We can now, because what started here in Valencia, we can get words back and forth at the speed of light practically, but we can't verify that. And until we do that, we are going to be screaming at one another for a while. And I personally don't look forward to that. I think it's destructive of everything that human beings stand for. But I think it's the world that we're going to face until we can figure out how do we establish reliability and truth.
Just coming from a media organisation, I suppose the thing that sometimes we find is that people are very afraid of the media, whereas really, like especially in a local station, Radio Kerry has always seen itself as the voice of the kingdom. So we really are just a means by which people tell their own story. We facilitate it. So you don't need press releases, you don't need PR agencies, you need to pick up the phone. And last year during the presidential election, we were very conscious of there was obviously an anti-traveller element to it in terms of one of the candidates, but we found it very hard to get people to balance it back. So we developed a programme with help through a media literacy fund called Speak Up, where disadvantaged groups come into the radio station for a week and get media training and present and produce their own programme. Because if people don't learn to speak up, then it doesn't matter what way you're communicating it. Voices will be lost, opinions will be lost, more dominant ones will come to the fore. So sometimes it's just a bit of self-confidence, and people in general will, are happy to have stories, especially good news ones.
I mean, I would answer that actually very differently. There are plenty of people in the world reading to the end of the paragraph and the end of the page, and they are building astonishing things. The Chinese are doing incredible things with technology. The ambassador talked about the extraordinary space exploration capabilities that are being underway in the realm of science. I think it's very easy to get distracted by the noise of political discourse and think that real things aren't happening in the world. And competitiveness is about the development of that kind of ongoing, astonishing rate of human development. When you spend time in Europe, I noticed that the Polish educational system points people very clearly to the technical nth detail of a process. It's actually, in some respects, sometimes a disadvantage, believe it or not. But that when you do business in Japan, meticulous detail orientation in that process. So we need to be very careful to realize that sometimes the quality of our political discourse, which I would say I would agree with the ambassador and with you, we're becoming far less detailed. But the competitive advantage are going to accrue to those people who are actually looking at the detail, and there are hundreds of millions of them in the world doing that.
Time for one or two more.
So I'm going to take so political discourse and order is the foundation upon which you build all else. And your political institutions create the arena within which economic institutions either rise or fall. So if other economies are, and European economies are as well, delivering the wonder that Sean accurately referred to, it's because political choices are made that enable that to happen. I said in my speech earlier on about the pride I feel in being a politician. I believe citizens should be aware that political order and our political health is the cornerstone upon which we build much else. So I believe your question is so important. How do we do it? We support local media. And I'm not just saying this because I'm in the presence of Kerry Radio here.
Glad to hear it though.
And it's the reason why, for example, I did not put up the VAT rate on newspapers. And the reason why I did that was because of the effect that it would have had on local media. It would have been gigantic. Support local media, because when your local media disappears, the scrutiny on local matters goes with it. And when the local dies, the national follows. So local media, number one, build and open libraries everywhere. Ireland is opening up new libraries at the moment. We are rebuilding the libraries we have. Libraries are places of wonder. We need to make them look and feel like places of wonder. And then thirdly, and a broader point about civic engagement, we need to, and we have it here in Ireland, have electoral systems that means that nobody who wants to stay in public office has the ability to afford, has the ability to ignore any part of society. You can't stay elected in Ireland without being in touch with all elements of your constituency. And for too long, I believe, and I believed it myself for a while, we saw localism as a sign of vulnerability. I actually think, if done properly, it becomes a source of strength. And I think that is a broader point about civic engagement, which I think is really deeply important.
I think everybody that's in the room is here because of the story of the cable station, of the line, of Sarsfield, and wants to be part of being the keeper of that story. But I think equally with that, as well as keeping the story, we have to keep the vision, and we have to make sure that Kerry stays ahead, where we have bright, intelligent, creative people who are proud of where they come from and who want to share that with the world. So thank you all.